Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here with my card and video for this month's new Kawaii release at Stampers Delights. I'm using the Autumn Leaves Digi stamp set, which has this little girl with some leaves around her, and then separately the image with the pumpkin and the little acorn and some more leaves. I put them together to make a very simple little scene. I just used Word for arranging my Digi stamps. It's very straightforward, but if you would like me to do a video sometime to show how I do that, please do let me know. After I'd arranged the images, I printed them directly onto my white card base, which is made using some smooth white paper from WOW, and this is the first time I've used it for alcohol marker colouring. I am using my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers. As usual, you can see the caps on screen for the colours I'm using. I did quite like the paper. I found it was nice to blend on. I didn't have any issues with that, but I do think it's a little bit on the lightweight side for card bases, so I think I will probably just use it as panels in future, unless I'm going to be adding more layers on top of it to make it a bit sturdier. But for a one layer card, I think it's a bit lightweight. So as I was talking, you saw me colouring in her skin, and I did go for a darker skin tone. And I'm now moving on to colouring her hair. Her hair is lovely and curly, so we are going to colour it to emphasise the curliness that is drawn into it. And this is very straightforward. It's just a case of using kind of C shapes. So I started by mapping in the shadow areas and then putting in my C shapes more densely to the left hand side, which is where my shadows are going to be, and less densely to the right hand side, which is where my highlights are going to be, because that's where the light is hitting. This is actually a very similar technique to how I coloured the wool on my alpaca on a recent video, which I will link in the top right hand corner if you want to see that. It's really basically the same technique to give that kind of dimension to curly hair or wool. And actually I will briefly show it again later when I colour in the bobble on her hat, because I used exactly the same technique to do that as well. I did primarily use earth browns for her hair. I did also bring in a dark golden brown, which is the oak tree colour. For her skin, I had used TNs, which are tans, so it just adds a bit of differentiation between the browns and helps it not all blend together and look the same colour. I also did go back over her hair a second time with all the colours because I wasn't entirely happy with it the first time, and I just wanted to build that up a bit. Once her hair was done, I moved on to colouring the pumpkin because I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with her outfit yet, and the pumpkin was pretty straightforward to decide because I knew I wanted it to be orange. And I used a burnt orange combination for this with a golden yellow as a highlight colour. This gives a kind of muted orange, but I think it works nicely for the look I was going for. I then used a dark grey-green for the inside of the pumpkin's mouth and more pumpkin-y colours for his tongue. Back to the little girl, I decided I would colour her coat in red. I really seem to be enjoying this red combination recently. I used it yesterday on my dragon card. I used it last week on my witch card for the Thrifty Thursday at Stampers Delights. And basically it is a combination of red browns for building the shadows, and then my one and only red Spectrum Noir to paint over it and turn it all red. The more brown you use here, the more muted the colours will be, and I did go for quite a lot of that red-brown underpainting because with this being autumn colours, I wanted it to be quite muted red, not a very bright red. Next, I moved on to colouring her hat, gloves, tights, and what I'm assuming to be the belt around her dress. And I'm doing these actually in similar colours to the pumpkin, so orange, although I did switch the golden yellow that I'd used on the pumpkin with the vanilla that I'd used on the pumpkin's tongue as the lightest colour here. I'm also going to use this same orange combination to colour some of the stripes on the scarf. I kind of have mixed feelings about having used this colour combination for her tights and gloves and belt because I feel like it looks too close to her skin colour, like it almost could just be skin. I'm not sure. Do you think it's obvious that it's orange, or do you think it looks like it could be her skin? I will later go in and change the colour on her belt at least, because I really didn't want it to look like she has a bare stomach, because this is meant to be a cold autumn scene and that just didn't seem right for that scene. I chose yellow for the next stripe on her hat and the next stripes on the scarf as well. And then I went for a more muted yellow to finish the hat and the scarf. And I don't actually use that light yellow very often. I feel like it's more brown than yellow, but I figured for an autumn scene it works well enough. I did quickly colour the stem on the pumpkin before coming in with those greys and colouring the bubble on her hat, which, as I said, I did similar technique to her hair to give it that texture. And then I went around the rim of her hat as well to make that white with some shading with those greys. And I wanted to colour this as if each segment is kind of indented in between, like they're sewn along those lines, if that makes sense. So I did lay my shadows down each line as well. And then I'll use my blender pen to blend it all out. This is quite a colouring intensive card and did take a little while to do, but I enjoy colouring, especially now that my wrist is pretty much completely recovered. So I don't mind spending quite a while on colouring images. I decided to do her dress and her boots green. I'd actually considered green earlier for her gloves and so on, and decided against it because I felt it would look too Christmassy to have the red and the green, but apparently I went back to it at this point, and I don't think it looks too Christmassy with the oranges and yellows there as well. I then used the same green combination to colour the leaves, and this is a dull green combination, which again I wanted the more muted colours for the autumn feel that I'm going for. I also at this stage coloured the little acorn with some browns, again using some of the same browns I'd already used because I don't want to be bringing in too many colours. For the leaves, I decided to just use the same colours for each style of leaf. So the kind of almost heart-shaped leaves are all going to be muted browns. The straight leaves in the back were yellow greens. I used some golden browns for the kind of curved leaves to the sides, and just kept working through with different autumn leaf colours, so oranges and red as well. And again, as I keep saying, going with quite muted colours for these. Now is probably as good a time as any to mention that today's secret word is leaf or leaves, both are valid. So make sure to leave that in your comments and then click through to the Rafflecopter link in the description box as always and let it know that you have commented, and that will be your extra entry today towards the giveaway. When all my colouring was completed, I wanted to add a background and I decided I would do some stenciling for this. First, I need to mask off the ground portion, and I'm just going to use a piece of post-it tape, and this was very straightforward to do. I just want to mask straight across, but I do need to make sure that I place it high enough that everything that is meant to be on the ground will be below that masking line, because if her feet are above the masking line, for example, it will look like she is floating in the air, and we do not want that. So just be aware of how you position the ground to make sure that the perspective looks correct. I did also mask off down the left-hand side of the card base just to make sure I'm not going to be getting any ink on the back. And then put my stencil into place. I will hold it in position with some pieces of washi tape once I'm happy with where it is. And then I'm going to start on my ink blending. I'm using a small-ish brush because, as you may have noticed, I'm not masking off my image, so I'm just ink blending around the edges of it, being careful not to overlap it at all. I started with Tiara ink, which is a nice yellow colour, and then I'll switch to Tiki torch, which is orange. And whilst I went all over the stenciled area with the Tiara, I'm only going in a few places with the orange and kind of blending it in. I don't want full coverage with these subsequent colours because I want to be giving some kind of texture and variation to the leaves. So after the Tiki torch, I came in and did the same with Tea Dye Distress ink. And I'm keeping the colours of the leaves overall quite muted because I want them to fade into the background and help add dimension to the design rather than standing out intensely. So I didn't add a lot of colour there. And once I was happy with that, I removed the stencil and the grounding mask. And then I'm going to bring in an even smaller blending brush and again the Tea-Dye Distress ink and just add some shadowing beneath my images. The shadows will of course be darkest, closest to the images and fade out as they get further away. I then removed the masking tape from the back of my card base, which actually seemed to very slightly lift up the surface. Like, it didn't rip it, but it left it feeling quite rough. I'm not quite sure what happened there because it didn't happen where I'd masked over my images. So I don't entirely understand why that happened, but it is something I will try to remember when using this paper in future. The last thing I need to add to my card is a sentiment. I just pulled out one from an autumn stamp set in my stash, which says Warm Wishes. Positioned it to the bottom left of my card base and I'm stamping it with Hero Arts Cocoa ink, which is a nice rich brown. And I do stamp it multiple times, which is the beauty of the MISTI, allowing me to do that. And here you can see how the card looks when it's finished and folded and completely done. As I said earlier, this is part of the new Kawaii release at Stampers Delight. There are other images as well, so be sure to hop over and have a look if you're interested in any of those. Remember to leave the secret word in your comments and let the Rafflecopter know that you have done so that you're entered into the prize draw. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing with your friends and shopping with my affiliate links. Your support really means a lot to me. There are a couple of other videos on screen if you'd like to see more from me straight away. Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!